Hello, everybody. I just got a PDF of Wings of Starlight by Allison Saft. It's a new Disney book. I have it in my Google Drive, so I can't get rid of it. It's not like hacking into Google. But I found it off TikTok. I'll post the link in the description in case you want to read it yourself. But I'm nice and I share, so we're going to be reading this together. Guys, zoom in real close because it's tiny, too tiny to read. Now let's begin. There are things hidden from everyone except those who know exactly where they are. Look out your window in the early hours of twilight, when everyone is still asleep. You might notice an orb of light fluttering through the summer leaves, each one turning red as it passes. You might see faint ribbons of gold in the air, shimmering just above the darkness, pushing their way through the newly thawed earth. Perhaps if you're truly observant, you can see the chisel marks that punctuate the crystal lace of each snowflake. Unfortunately, few are, and therefore few will ever experience true wonder. Few will ever know that even the most mundane thing, the waning moon, the flow of the tide, the chance the appearance of a lost trinket under the kitchen table, is magical. All of this, of course, is the work of never fairies. They orchestrate the change of the season in a single night, and then return home. It says if you fly past the second star on the right, and continue straight to the tomorrow, you'll reach it, the kingdom of Pixie Hollow. Seen from above, Pixie Hollow is like a cake, cut into 4 generous pieces. In its center is the tree, fairy dust, luminous and golden like a candle in the darkness. To the east is the spring valley, where flowers remain eternally in bloom. To the south, the summer glade, where the days stretch out long and languid like a sleepy cat. To the west, autumn forest, whole and fresh and resplendent with color. And then to the north are the winter woods. The inhabitants of the warm seasons do their best to keep the winter forest far from their thoughts. When they glimpse it under the mountain's immense shadow, they cannot help but think of its skeletal trees, or the icicles that gleam like bare things in the moonlight, or those who dwell in a place so gray and lifeless, the winter fairies. So the warm fairies reason, are best left to their snowy solitude. They have managed their own affairs for centuries. Besides, the cold, there is so bitter and cruel that would shatter a warm fairy's wings in an instant. It would never do any good to cross its border. Now, most of their fears are unfounded superstitions, but though the warm seasons do not know it, dark forces dwell in the winter woods. There is a place where all the trees lean back, shuddering at the frozen lake beneath them. There, the air is heavy and strange as a feverish sweat. No one visits that place, no one with any sense, at any rate, except the young guardian of the winter woods. But if you were brave enough or foolish enough, you could set foot in the ice. Beneath it you would not find water, but deep, twisted darkness. Even if you could endure the terror it inspires for more than a moment, you would not be able to understand it. The shadows only occasionally organize themselves into a recognizable shape. Here a tooth, there an eye, a claw. None of you would ever experience such terror, but if you had somehow made it to the lake on the cold and moonless night, as the guardian of the winter woods did, you might have seen what he saw, the moment when a single crack split the surface of the ice. You might have heard the crunch as the snow fell from branches. You might have felt the forest itself tremble in its anticipation. Then something, just a shadow, rose like smoke from the ice and broken ice. It stood to boil, then collapsed into a form he remembered from the nightmare that had spawned him. In the darkness, it was almost impossible to see, but his footprints lay heavy on the earth. Then, driven by some horrible ancient instinct, it trudged forward into the warm seasons. Chapter 1. It was the kind of afternoon for daydreaming, the air gilded by sunlight and the fairy dust, the meadow humming with the low hum of bees. Clarion perched on the branch of an oak tree, surrounded by the rustling and rustling of leaves. How sweet to be alone, and at least for 15 glorious minutes, with nothing to do. He almost regretted the idea, beautiful as it was. It was too easy. Imagine Queen Alvina's response, delivered like a royal decree. The Queen of Pixie Hollow will not sit idly by while there is still work to be done. But Clarion was not the Queen of Pixie Hollow, at least not yet, and his weekly appointment with the summer minster had ended unexpectedly early. He had no intention of wasting this rare glimpse of freedom. With her coronation approaching, her very waking moment was filled with lessons, rehearsals, tests, and more meetings than she'd ever thought possible. All essential. She supposed when she only had a month left to absorb Alvina's 100 years of wisdom, and yet Pixie Hollow was vast and wonderful. Clarion sometimes suspected she knew nothing at all. How could he know when he had spent most of his life watching him from afar? Clarion looked out over the sunflower field with something dangerously close to longing. As the golden hour approached, the light-gifted fairies emerged, beaming with excitement and eager to face the controlled chaos of their busiest time of day. Through the canopy, she watched from Winder through the pollen-dense air, leaving trails of fairy dust in their wake. Some worked in teams to angle the sun's rays, ever closer to the horizon line, calling out things like a little to the left, and no, your other side to the left. Others dipped their hands into sunbeams and collected them in their baskets. As easy as collecting water from a well. Clara never ceased to be amazed at how many small details went into everyday magic of a sunset. It seemed impossible that soon, on midsummer night, she would be responsible for all of them. The prospect terrified her more than she cared to admit. A high-pitched whine interrupted her thoughts, and something sped past her, a black streak against the brightening sky. Clarion straggled forward, and nearly lost her balance before she caught herself on a rock. What the hell was that? With one hand resting on its beating heart, hooked down through from the curtain of leaves, a bee weaving its flight landed heavily on the ground and lay terribly still. After a moment, its wings fluttered. Clarion let out a sigh of relief. It wasn't hurt then, she thought. Poor creature must have exhausted itself. Bees were a hard-working bunch and tended to overestimate their limits, especially here in the perpetual heat of midsummer. Fortunately, it was nothing a spoonful of sugar couldn't fix. There was plenty of sugar in Pixie Hollow. The kitchen's no doubt stocked with all manner of sweets in this hour. Or in the palace. Better yet, the beehive, and all its honey, was just across the meadow. A simple problem with a simple solution. Yet, Clarion hesitated. Any problem in the kingdom made him want to fix it. At one time, she believed that tendency was the spark of her latent magic and talent of role, a small part of a whole family that made sense to her. But now he realized that he couldn't trust his instincts, his compassion. The Queen of Pixie Hollow does not belong to her subjects. Since her arrival, the night she emerged from the fallen star, like every Queen of Pixie Hollow before her, Alvina had instilled in her that she was different, that they were different, doubly marked with stardust. Aside from Alvina, Clarion was the only talented ruler in all of Pixie Hollow. Clarion looked out the meadow, where teams of animals, talents of gardening queens, herded their flock of bees. Would they notice any were missing? Even if they did, their search would take all night. Perhaps something as insignificant as saving a bee was of no interest to her. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving now. What queen would she be if she walked away from the suffering of even the smallest subjects? Now all that was left was to get down from the tree. A heavy cloak hung over her shoulders. trapping her wings beneath its weight. All fairies gave off a faint aura which shimmered and dimmed depending on their mood. But thanks to her wings' brilliance, she had always been I can't say that word. Although the fairies with a talent for light here in the summer shared their penchant for gold, the resemblance wasn't striking enough to allow them to hide in plain sight. Letting someone see their wings was like shouting, "Here comes the Queen of Pixie Hollow." If someone had told Elvina that she had been there unsupervised, no, she couldn't have stood it. I was thinking about it. I'd have to go down. Awkward, yes. Dangerous, almost certainly. But she much preferred the risk of falling to enduring another lecture from Elvina, stealing herself. Clarion climbed down branch by branch. The bee was burned and the bark left her hands raw. But by some miracle, she managed not to twist her ankle as she landed in the sea of sunflowers. They towered above her, swaying gently in the breeze and casting dappled shadows across the grass. And they had just been a few feet ahead of her. The bee lay in a pool of yellow light. She approached the bee cautiously, knelt beside it. "Are you okay?" The bee's antennae turned lethargically towards her, which Clarion decided to interpret as a yes. It occurred to her that she had never interacted with a bee before. Many of the fairies kept them as pets, as much as pets were allowed, considering they came and went as they pleased. The fairies befriended them with dishes of nectar left on windowsills, and in the gardens filled with their favorite flowers, catnip, lavender, and black-eyed Susan. Elvina had never forbidden such things, of course, but she never encouraged them either. The ease others had with the animals of Pixie Hollow was another thing Clarion had never learned. "Let's get you back in the air," she said. She felt a little silly talking to him, as if a bee could understand her. Only talented animals could truly communicate with other creatures. Still, just in case, she added, "Please don't sting me." Carefully, she took the creature in her arms. The bee offered no resistance, and Clarion could have sworn she saw the gratitude in its eyes. Its fur was surprisingly soft and gave off a faint scent, brightness of lemon and the earthiness of pollen. Standing so close, Clarion realized for the first time how similar a bee's wings were those to the rest of her subjects. They were as fragile and as precious as glass, and marked with the intricate pattern of veins. It made that protective instinct flare up inside her even more. Holding the bee to her chest, she made her way through the field of sunflowers. Through the canopy, she saw the fairies fluttering about. Specks of fairy dust floated lazily through the air, along with the sparkling sound of their laughter. Filled her with happiness and nostalgia, and made also a terrible loneliness. All the fairies who shared a talent lived together, worked together, and played together. They mingled with others, of course, but there was an innate understanding between those who were created for the same purpose. Sometimes Clarion wondered what it would be like to feel like you belong somewhere, to have so many other people turn to you who understood you completely. They reached the edge of the field where a tall maple tree cast its long shadow over them. What caught Clarion's attention was the hollow in its trunk, a hole a few feet from the ground with precise rows of golden honeycombs, the beehive. Clarion carefully placed the bee on its grass. "I'll be right back." She responded with a flutter of her wings. In a sense, perhaps the bee understood her. Clarion turned back to the tree and took a deep breath to calm herself. She had already climbed the tree today. What was another one? She pulled herself up, finding footings in the furrows of the bark and the caps of the mushrooms that bloomed on the trunk. At last she climbed to the edge of the hole. The soothing hum of bees reverberated in her chest, and the comforting smells of florals of wax and nectar washed over her. Clarion carefully removed a layer of wax that sealed the honeycomb. Immediately, honey oozed out to the surface. In the evening sunlight, it almost seemed to glow. Clarion plucked a leaf from the branch and used it to collect the honey that dripped languidly from the honeycomb. The return trip was dangerous with only one hand, but she managed not to fall. He hurried to return to his bee and placed the leaf beside him. Here you go. Clarion watched anxiously as she drank. Slowly the bee began to move. First she stood up cautiously, as if to test whether her delicate legs would support her. Then, clearly emboldened, she took flight. She did pirouettes and cartwheels, clinging to Clarion as if to say, "Join me." I wish I could. Clarion couldn't help but smile. Although her talent eluded her, perhaps she could do something good. Me? Say me. May! Someone called, their voice breaking with panic. May! The bee perked up when she heard its name. Clarion looked up and saw the talented animal frantically combing its hair. Sunflowers. Looking for this one? The fairy's dark face appeared between the petals, confusion written clearly on her features. She blinked hard at the empty sea in front of her. Is there anyone there? Down here! He started and nearly fell off his perch. Clarion grimaced. It was true. It was rare to see a fairy standing upright. Sheepishly, she adjusted the drape of her cloak. Fortunately, the brightness of the summer sun dimmed the light cast by her wings. A little escape from her collar only faintly tinted her skin. No more than the reflection of the golden button she held beneath her chin. Sweat ran down her back, sliding through her trousers. He really couldn't wait to be freed from his lair, and a heat for that matter. When the animal talent regained consciousness, its gaze fell on the bee. May! May headed towards the fairy at full speed, swerving at just the right moment. The talented animal did not flinch, as if she were used to such displays. She seemed to be suppressing a smile as May drove into a sunflower. You were supposed to pollinate the marigolds today, the fairy complained, but Clarion could tell from the look on her face she was relieved to have been found. May re-emerged, covered in pollen. She shook off the axis like a wet dog and flew off to join the rest of its hive. Even Clarion noticed she was grooming. Seems like a handful, Clarion observed. Oh, you don't know the half of it. The talented animal shook her head in exasperation and turned to Clarion. That was a very kind thing you did. Clarion felt surprised and somewhat taken back by the praise. Few fairies they spoke without them addressing her first, all being excluded an imposing aura that enveloped Clarion in its protection. Kept her inside. Yes, but everyone else outside. I was woefully out of practice with any kind of small talk. Trying to keep the formality out of her voice, he said. It's no problem. Still, thank you. The animal's talent smile was warm as the summer itself. Sure you're busy, though, without chasing stray bees. Clarion smiled back hesitantly. You're welcome. Have you seen me around before? The fairy frowned, searched his face as if to locate her features. You seem almost Clarion? Clarion shuddered at the sound of her own name. Familiar voice. The Minister of Summer, exposed. Fear gripped Clarion as she turned to look at the minister. Aurelia was floating right behind her with a look of mild surprise. She had dark skin and eyes as golden as fairy dust. Her hair fell in curls toward her shoulders. The day she wore a yellow dress. The tired skirt was adorned with flowers, arranged in clusters of pink, orange, and white. What are you still doing here? She asked. Thought you would have already returned to the palace. I wandered out for a moment, she replied weakly, to rest. Aurelia was glad to hear that. She had been shaped by an eternity of languid afternoons of summer and valued peace and quiet above all else. Here in the summer glade there was always time for a nap or a glass of lemonade, although it was during the day. Midday heat, they really came alive at night. Summer was the only reason in which never truly fell asleep. Clarion stayed there much longer. Those who lived under the moonlight, the talents of fireflies and the talents of counting stars, would emerge from their slumber. "My brilliant protege," Aurelia whispered. "See, you're learning about summer." The praise sounded hollow, but Clarion forced joy into her voice. "Thank you, Minister." She smiled indulgently. "Now, if you excuse me, I have to check up on my talents with flight." With that, she left reluctantly. Clarion glanced sideways at the fairy, who had turned quite pale. She opened her mouth to say something, anything to reassure her. It was too late. She saw the exact moment when the other fairy realized. The exact moment where his surprise turned to mortification, and then something like astonishment. Clarion could hardly bear it. "Princess Clarion," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Clarion raised her hands as a sign of appeasement. "There's no need to apologize, but there is." The talented beast bowed his head deeply. "Your Highness, please forgive my impatience. If I had known, then I would never have talked to Clarion." What else could he say? In a low voice, he said, "You are forgiven." The talented animal bowed his head again, muttering the broken "thank you." She hurried away. She would certainly return to his work and his friends. That familiar ache of loneliness unfolded through her like a breakdown star. For a few precious moments, Clarion had almost been able to forget who she was. There was no guards following her at a distance. No one stood at attention when she passed. A conversation died down as she came closer. There were no whispers as she passed, but none of that mattered in the end. Even there, she couldn't escape what she was. She would have wanted his respect, difference, and partial distance, but she didn't. More than anything, she wanted one thing that seemed truly impossible: be known. Alvina, never. Alvina. Oh, stars, if she didn't leave now, she would be late. She undid the brooch around her neck and let fall her traveling cloak. She hurriedly gathered into her arms and took flight, emerging from the sunflowers in a flurry of golden light and golden petals. Few bees that were passing slowly deviated from their course to avoid her. As she soared higher into the sky, she trailed a trail of pollen from behind her. She allowed herself a moment to look back, immediately regretted it. The light talents had apparently finished their afternoon's work. They split into teams and were throwing a ball of light back and forth over a net. If from the distance, Clarion could hear their cries of laughter and the mixed cries of triumph and frustration when one team scored a point. The sight of her subjects, so completely unhappy and complicated, should have delighted her. But at the moment, it was only a painful reminder of her own solitude as queen. However much she might want to, she could never truly belong to that group. I think I'm going to go now. Like I said, I'll post the link to this in the description. I just noticed that some of the grammar doesn't quite add up, but I'm sure that'll be alright. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see more, please like and subscribe, and also comment. But I gotta go now. There's stuff for me to do, and my phone is slowly dying.